The 6th of June 1944 dawned with the fate of the world hanging in the balance. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, the serene beauty of the early morning sky belied the monumental events about to unfold on the beaches of Normandy. Operation Overlord, better known as D-Day, represented the culmination of years of planning and the fervent hopes of a world desperate for liberation. The meticulous strategy sessions, the countless hours spent poring over maps and intelligence reports, all led to this pivotal moment. The Allied commanders knew that the success of this operation was crucial to turning the tide of the war. The sheer scale of the operation was unprecedented. Thousands of ships and aircraft, along with hundreds of thousands of Allied troops, were poised to storm the beaches of Normandy. The English Channel, usually a barrier, had become a highway for the largest amphibious invasion in history. The air was filled with the roar of engines and the determination of those who knew the stakes. Their objective to breach Hitler's Atlantic Wall and liberate Nazi-occupied Europe. The soldiers, sailors and airmen were acutely aware of the formidable defenses awaiting them. The Atlantic Wall, a series of fortifications along the coast, was designed to repel any invasion. Yet the resolve of the Allied forces was unshakable. The significance of D-Day's success cannot be overstated. It marked a turning point in the war. The initial landings were fraught with peril, but as the day progressed, the tide began to turn in favor of the Allies. The sight of jubilant troops advancing, overcoming obstacles and securing beachheads was a testament to their bravery and determination. The liberation of France and the eventual defeat of Nazi Germany hinged on the success of this daring invasion. As Allied forces pushed inland, they were met with cheers and tears of joy from French civilians who had endured years of occupation. The sight of Allied tanks rolling through liberated towns symbolized the beginning of the end for Nazi tyranny. The Allied forces understood the gravity of their mission. Failure was not an option, yet it remained a chilling possibility. The tension in the air was palpable as soldiers prepared for battle, their faces etched with determination and resolve. They knew that the outcome of the entire war rested on their shoulders. The outcome of the entire war rested on a knife's edge. The initial hours of the invasion were critical, with every moment fraught with danger and uncertainty. The bravery displayed by the soldiers on those beaches, facing relentless enemy fire, was nothing short of heroic. Each step forward was a step closer to victory, but also a step deeper into the unknown. The German defenses were formidable. The Atlantic Wall, stretching along the French coastline, bristled with bunkers, artillery, and machine gun nests. These fortifications were designed to create a nearly impenetrable barrier. The Allies knew that breaching these defenses would require not just strength and strategy, but also an element of surprise. The element of surprise was crucial. The Allies needed to catch the Germans off guard, but if their defenses held, the consequences would be catastrophic. The success of the invasion depended on the ability to outmaneuver and outthink the enemy. As the first waves of troops landed, the world held its breath, waiting to see if this bold gamble would pay off. The courage and sacrifice of those who fought on D-Day would forever be remembered as a turning point in the fight for freedom. The potential failure of D-Day cast a long shadow over the Allied High Command. The stakes were incredibly high, and the weight of the decision to proceed with the invasion was almost unbearable. The leaders knew that the success or failure of this operation could determine the outcome of the entire war. The thought of thousands of troops cut down on the beaches, their lives lost in a matter of moments, was a haunting prospect. The beaches of Normandy, intended to be the gateway to liberating Europe, could have easily turned into a graveyard for the brave soldiers who stormed them. Their sacrifices in vain was almost unbearable. The image of fallen comrades lying lifeless on the sands would have been a devastating sight for those who survived. The emotional toll on the soldiers and their families back home would have been immeasurable. The strategic implications were equally dire. A failed invasion would have meant a significant setback in the Allied efforts to push back the Axis powers. The carefully laid plans, months in the making, would have been rendered useless, and the momentum of the war would have shifted dramatically. A defeat on the beaches of Normandy would have dealt a devastating blow to Allied morale. The confidence of the troops, already tested by years of brutal conflict, would have been shattered. The psychological impact of such a loss could have led to a prolonged period of uncertainty and hesitation in future operations. The dream of liberating Europe would have been shattered. The occupied nations, yearning for freedom, would have faced the grim reality of continued oppression under Nazi rule. The hope that had been kindled by the promise of liberation would have been extinguished, leaving a continent in despair. The immediate aftermath of a failed invasion would have been characterized by chaos and despair. The orderly plans would have descended into disarray, with soldiers retreating in confusion and fear. The sense of defeat would have permeated the ranks, making it difficult to regroup and plan the next move. Thousands of Allied soldiers would have been killed or captured. The human cost of such a failure would have been staggering, with countless families receiving the dreaded news of their loved ones' fate. The prisoners of war would have faced harsh conditions and uncertain futures in enemy hands. The English Channel would have run red with the blood of the fallen. The waters meant to be a bridge to freedom would have become a somber reminder of the high price of war. The sight of wounded soldiers struggling in the water would have been a heart-wrenching testament to the brutality of the conflict. The loss of life would have been staggering and the political fallout immeasurable. Leaders on both sides of the Atlantic would have faced intense scrutiny and criticism. The failure of such a high-profile operation would have led to a crisis of confidence in the leadership and strategy of the Allied forces. The failure of D-Day would have emboldened the Axis powers. The Nazis, buoyed by their success, would have intensified their efforts to maintain control over occupied territories. Hitler's propaganda machine would have seized the opportunity to portray the failure as a sign of Allied weakness and German invincibility. Germany, bolstered by its victory, would have been free to concentrate its forces on the Eastern Front against the Soviet Union. The already fierce battles in the East would have escalated, with the Germans redirecting their resources and manpower to crush Soviet resistance. The war in Europe could have dragged on for years. The hope for a swift end to the conflict would have been dashed, leading to prolonged suffering and destruction. The soldiers, already weary from years of fighting, would have faced an even longer and more grueling campaign. The dream of a quick and decisive end to the conflict would have been extinguished. The celebrations that had been anticipated would have been replaced by a somber realization of the long road ahead. The morale of the troops and the civilian population would have been severely impacted. Moreover, a failed invasion would have had profound implications for the geopolitical landscape of the post-war world. The balance of power in Europe would have been dramatically altered, with long-lasting effects on international relations and the future of the continent. The Soviet Union, already making significant advances in Eastern Europe, would have emerged from the war even stronger. Stalin's influence would have extended further into the heart of Europe, reshaping the political boundaries and alliances in the post-war era. The balance of power would have shifted dramatically, potentially shaping the course of the Cold War and beyond. The failure of D-Day could have set the stage for a very different world, one where the lines of conflict and cooperation were drawn in ways we can only imagine. In the face of these grim possibilities, the Allied forces were acutely aware of the stakes. The success of their operations hinged not just on brute force, but on the art of deception and strategic cunning. The war had reached a critical juncture, and every decision could tip the balance between victory and defeat. To navigate these treacherous waters, the Allies developed a series of contingency plans. These were not mere backup plans, but intricate strategies designed to adapt to the fluid and unpredictable nature of war. Each plan was meticulously crafted, taking into account various scenarios and potential enemy responses. These plans, shrouded in secrecy, were the result of countless hours of deliberation and analysis. The highest levels of military intelligence were involved, ensuring that every detail was considered. The goal was to be prepared for any eventuality, no matter how dire. These contingency plans were designed to salvage the situation if the worst were to happen. They were the safety net that would catch the Allies if their primary operations failed. The commanders knew that in war nothing was certain, and being prepared for failure was as important as planning for success. One such plan involved the continuation of Operation Fortitude, a sophisticated deception operation that had played a crucial role in the success of D-Day. This operation was not just a one-time trick, but a sustained effort to mislead the enemy over an extended period. Operation Fortitude was a masterful blend of misinformation and misdirection. It was a psychological game designed to sow confusion and doubt in the minds of the German High Command. The operation involved a complex web of fake signals, dummy equipment, and false intelligence. The aim of Operation Fortitude was to mislead the Germans about the location, timing, and scale of the D-Day landings. By creating a convincing illusion, the Allies hoped to divert German forces away from the actual invasion sites, thereby reducing the resistance faced by the landing troops. The Allies went to great lengths to ensure the success of this deception. They created a fictitious army group complete with inflatable tanks and fake radio traffic, stationed in southeast England. This phantom army was designed to appear as a formidable force poised to strike at Pas-de-Calais. The presence of this phantom army effectively diverted German troops and resources away from Normandy. The Germans were convinced that the main invasion would occur at Pas-de-Calais, and they kept significant forces in that area, waiting for an attack that would never come. This strategic misdirection was a key factor in the success of the Normandy landings. However, the Allies knew that the war was far from over and they needed to be prepared for any eventuality. In the event of a failed invasion, Operation Fortitude would not have been abandoned. Instead, it would have been expanded and intensified. The Allies would have continued to feed the Germans false information, creating new layers of deception to keep the enemy off balance. The goal was to convince the Germans that the real invasion was still to come, buying valuable time to regroup and plan their next move. This extended deception would have involved even more elaborate ruses and false signals. The Allies would have used every tool at their disposal, from fake radio broadcasts to misleading intelligence reports, to maintain the illusion of an imminent threat. The success of this strategy relied on the ability to keep the Germans guessing. The more uncertain the enemy was, the more dispersed their forces would be. This would prevent them from concentrating their might against the Allies or the Soviets, thereby weakening their overall position. The Allies would have continued to feed the Germans false information. The goal would be to convince them that the real invasion was still to come, buying valuable time to regroup and plan their next move. This elaborate charade would have kept the German high command guessing. The threat of an imminent invasion would have forced them to keep their forces dispersed. This would have prevented them from concentrating their might against the Soviets in the east, offering a glimmer of hope in the face of potential disaster. The Allies' ability to adapt and deceive was a testament to their strategic ingenuity. They understood that in war, the mind can be as powerful a weapon as the sword. By keeping the Germans in a state of perpetual uncertainty, they were able to create opportunities and exploit weaknesses. This elaborate charade would have kept the German high command guessing. The threat of an imminent invasion would have forced them to keep their forces dispersed. This would have prevented them from concentrating their might against the Soviets in the east, offering a glimmer of hope in the face of potential disaster. The threat of an imminent invasion would have forced them to keep their forces dispersed. This would have prevented them from concentrating their might against the Soviets in the east, offering a glimmer of hope in the face of potential disaster. This would have prevented them from concentrating their might against the Soviets in the east, offering a glimmer of hope in the face of potential disaster. The Allies' ability to adapt and deceive was a testament to their strategic ingenuity. They understood that in war, the mind can be as powerful a weapon as the sword. By keeping the Germans in a state of perpetual uncertainty, they were able to create opportunities and exploit weaknesses. Another intriguing contingency plan involved a radical and somewhat outlandish concept: building aircraft carriers out of ice. This audacious plan, codenamed Operation Habakkuk, was the brainchild of Geoffrey Pike, an eccentric inventor with a penchant for unconventional solutions. Pike proposed constructing massive aircraft carriers using a material called picrete. Picrete, a mixture of ice and wood pulp, was surprisingly strong and resilient. It was also relatively cheap and easy to produce. The proposed Habakkuk carriers would have been colossal, dwarfing even the largest conventional carriers of the time. They would have been virtually unsinkable and capable of launching and recovering large numbers of aircraft. While the concept of picrete was sound, the sheer scale of Operation Habakkuk presented formidable logistical challenges. Constructing and deploying these behemoths of ice would have required an immense industrial effort. The project was ultimately deemed impractical and was shelved. Despite its ultimate demise, Operation Habakkuk stands as a testament to the ingenuity and outside-the-box thinking that characterized the Allied war effort. It highlights their willingness to explore every conceivable option, no matter how unconventional, in their quest for victory.